What do you make of 12, 62, 72, 73 and 85 compared to previous years when you've been pretty busy in the top order?
It's a little bit different. I mean, we went through a period a few years before that where we were sort of picking later in the draft after we did some trades at the top end. So it's not like we're not used to it, but it's just a little bit different when it's sort of so spread out. Having that first round pick and then nothing for 2 or 3 rounds. And so which is sort of a bit of a waiting period to see sort of what players are sort of in amongst it and whether we consider maybe moving back into the draft at some stage if there's players there that we like.
What's that debate like about trading into, say, the second or third round again?
Oh, debates. It's sort of you need to have a group of players that I think still interest you and sort of still enhance your list. You've also then got to weigh up the cost of coming back in to what that's sort of worth as well. So it's not so much a to and fro, and it's just more of a debate between the recruiting staff and the list management staff and the coaching group.
What do you think you'll be looking at number 12? Is there a a portfolio player that you're looking at, or is it the standard best player available at number 12?
Oh, it's a little bit of probably a little bit more of a mix this year. Obviously, with the lack of football the Victorian boys have played, not just this year but also last year, compared to the rest of the country, they're a little bit unknown in some ways. I think the move from 16 up to 12 sort of put us in maybe a different category of player. So I think there's a little bit of a mix of types that we'll sort of hopefully have an opportunity to choose from.
How much are you relying on your scouting network because of that uncertainty of what's happened in the past 2 years with Victorian kids?
We always rely heavily, but obviously the restrictions on travelling have made it a lot harder to see players. And obviously, this draft, none of our recruiting staff, full-time recruiting staff, I should say, have been able to get to Perth for the last 2 years and watch any football in Perth. So that's another added dimension, even though they've been playing. So we're just watching basically a lot of vision of players, every weekend and then during the week as well to catch up with stuff. So it's made it a different way of trying to work through a draft. You do prefer to watch them live at least a few times during the year. We just haven't quite had that opportunity with several of the players that we're probably discussing, with our first pick.
To go back to number 12, is there a particular type of player you see that's really necessary for the list at the moment?
Not particularly. I mean, I think Jason Cripps has done a good job bringing in players to sort of fix some so-called gaps on our list, and I think the recruiting team has done a good job in drafting players to sort of fill spots on our list across all 3 areas of the game. So I don't think there's a glaring need. As I said, we're going to sort of you always sort of try to go with the best player available type approach, but there's a few different types of players in that group that we're hoping to consider. So it's a little bit unknown. I mean, pick 12 will probably end up being pick 14 once Dacos and Darcy are bid for. So it's a little bit more uncertain. You're not quite sure what's happening in front of us at the moment.
Have you got a handle on how the Burgoyne one will go with bidding and so forth, or what's your read there at the moment?
Oh, look, I think with Jace, most of the clubs, I think, have obviously watched him play a lot, obviously because he has played a lot in the last 2 years compared to some. The way we've sort of worked our draft order and trading of picks to get points, etc. We would expect that a bid would come in probably the second half of the draft, and that's the way we've sort of been working in the last probably the last month.
So how are you going to deal with that huge gap between 12 and 62?
Well, as I said at the start, we sort of, we've got a list. We've been working the last, probably month and then the last probably week and a half, really narrowing that focus into a group of players that we'd be prepared to draft on the night. And so if there's players in that group that are sort of still sitting there in the mid part of the draft, we might look at maybe coming back in. It also depends on where that bid does come for Jace Burgoyne and what picks we're left with once that does happen as well. So there's a couple of different scenarios, but so we're just going to have, and obviously we'll have a little bit of time to work through that after tomorrow night's done, and then you've got Thursday, all day Thursday before round 2 starts, we might have a bit more of a feel for what might be happening later that night. So, we're working through different contingencies.
Okay.
Geoff, g'day, mate. Couple of little links with Nasai Wanganeen Miller. Is he a player that you guys have had some discussions with, and do you still expect him to be around when you guys pop up?
I'll look with Nasai. I think everyone would have seen that he's got some talent, and there's no doubt that he'd be in discussions for our pick at 12 if he's still available. I honestly don't know whether he will be or won't be. There's been media speculation that he might be gone, and there's media speculation he might be there. It's really hard to know. I think now in this day and age, with the live trading of picks and clubs being able to manoeuvre in and out and that sort of thing, the information you're getting, it's a lot harder to get information on where a player might actually really sit in that sort of top bracket of the draft. And so that's made it a lot harder as well.
On that, so Geoff, if you say that that you think there's a strong chance he'll be gone by that point, does that mean, given both the family ties, his talent to the club, and all those sorts of things, that if he is there at 12 or 14, that you'd be pretty hard pressed not to take him?
I don't know about that, but he's definitely going to be, if he's still sitting there when it's our turn to pick, he's going to be in the conversation of the group of players that we would consider. There's no doubt about that. And obviously, he's a South Australian boy. There's ties with his with his stepfather and his mother to the club as well. So it's a big discussion. Yes.
How will you balance the fact of you might have a player who's a Victorian, hasn't played much footy for a couple of years, who you might think on paper is actually a better footballer versus a South Aussie kid that you've actually been able to get some eyes on for the past couple of years, who maybe on paper isn't quite as good a talent? How will you mix that balance this year?
Well, that's been the challenge. Last year wasn't quite as bad. I mean, for a couple of reasons. One was Lockie Jones was coming through our NGA program, and we always considered he would probably end up being on our list. But last year, the Victorian kids had only really missed 1 year of football, whereas this group, they've missed 2 years of football. So that makes it a lot harder. And you're sort of filtering back, looking at vision from when they were 16 and a little bit of stuff they were able to do this year. So there's always a balancing act between, the local boys from South Australia and the rest of the players from around the country, and trying to weigh all that up and how it all fits. I think we've done a good job in the last few years of sort of balancing that out and picking the right players for our club at the right pick. And we're going to hopefully be able to do that again on tomorrow night and then Thursday.
Hey, Geoff, just Matt here from The Advertiser.
Hi, Matt.
Hope you're going well. I just wondered, had you guys have any discussions with GWS re their first pick for a future first? And if so, where do things stand there?
Oh, look, I think Jason Cripps has spoken to all the clubs in terms of what maybe potential trades on the draft night. I know with GWS, they're fairly settled now on keeping pick 2 or the second pick in the second live pick in the draft. So I don't think that's going to be obtainable. And then after that, I'm not 100% sure how it's going to work. But the cost of moving up that high is great, and you've really got to weigh it out.
Sorry, I was referring to their pick that's just after yours.
Oh, sorry. That's potentially in play, I think. As I said, Jason's spoken to all the clubs. I think there's 2 or 3 clubs that are sort of a bit like us and just, or what I say, like sitting there looking at, well, we've picked a player with our first pick. Is there a group of players we still like? Can we move back further or obtain something of more value somewhere else? So I think there's a possibility, but I know we have had a brief discussion with GWS, yes.
How likely then do you think it is that, obviously there's father, son and academy pushbacks, but how likely is it that you go into Wednesday and Thursday night with the hands that you have at the moment?
I would think that tomorrow night we'll go in with what we've got. I think that the issue not the issue, but GWS will be looking, and I'm assuming that they will have a sort of a group of players they would like to select at that pick after ours. And if that group's gone, then that's when they would consider maybe trading. And if there's still some of those players there, then I would, if it was me, I wouldn't trade. But that's every club's different. But I think that's how it's going to play out, to be honest. And then the potential, as I said, we were always looking at improving our list and how we do that, whether it's trading back in through the second and third rounds and what that will cost us to do that. That's something else we have to weigh up.
Just further to the stuff on Jace before, which club do you expect to bid for Jace?
At this stage, I'm not 100% sure. Obviously, I think Essendon have shown a little bit of interest in talking to Jace, clubs that have actually spoken to him and indicated some interest. I think Melbourne and Essendon are probably the two strongest. And so that's potentially where that may sit. And looking at where they pick in the draft, well, their sort of second or third selections, so to speak, sort of sit in that back, as I said, the second half of the draft. So that's where we're thinking a bid might come if it does come.
And just one last one. Am I right in saying that Trent Dumont is a potential late option / rookie draft selection, or at least would be considered at that stage?
We follow all the South Australian boys that are in the system, and obviously he's now out of it. Well, he's a delisted free agent opportunity as well. So, and he was coaching his initial time at Norwood by Nathan Bassett. So, we have spoken with him. Whether it turns out to be he ends up on our list, I don't know. We've obviously, as I said, we've got players in the draft that we would, or in this draft pool that we'd really like to pick. So that will depend on how that all turns out.
Geoff, could I ask you about another Wanganeen, Tex Wanganeen? Is there any chance of a late flyer on him or a rookie selection, or is it just a case of unfortunately hasn't played enough footy in the last couple of years?
Well, I think it's more that he just hasn't been able to play enough in the last couple of years. Obviously with the COVID, shutting down the competition, not only the NAB League, but also the schools competition in Melbourne. And then he suffered an injury pre-season. So he was able to get back and play a couple of sort of local sort of football games this year, but he just hasn't played enough. I attended a session last week where a few players were invited along to do some skill sessions, and Tex was at that. But I think for Tex, he just needs to get fit and healthy next year and play a whole season, and then the determination will be made then, probably by us or Essendon, and he has the choice, obviously. So we'll just have to wait with that. But there won't be any late rush this year, I wouldn't have thought.
Sure.
Hey, Geoff, it's Max from 10. I just wanted to ask about one of the players in particular who could fall around 12. Have you looked or talked a whole lot to Josh Sin? And do you think he might get to you there?
Josh is definitely one of the players that was in that group that we thought when we tried up potentially be available. I honestly don't know. Once again, like all the players, other than Dacos and Darcy, we've interviewed all those players, and some of them a couple of times. But I honestly don't know. I mean, I've seen some mock drafts done the last couple of days, and he seems to be the player they keep allocating to us. Whether that turns out to be, I don't know. Whether he's going to be available or not. And once again, not only has he been restricted because of the COVID, he's also had some injury issues over the last couple of years as well. So there's a few, question marks on him physically, but when he's played, he's been able to play okay. So, but we'll definitely, he'll be in that discussion if he's available when we pick.
In this year, you've sort of said a little bit in a year like this with all of the restrictions you've had. Are you sort of more likely to take a flyer on someone that maybe hasn't played because of injury or COVID than you would have in years past? Like, you're more happy to take that slight gamble?
Oh, I think it's more of a gamble just because they haven't played, all the Victorians haven't played. So if you pick a Victorian, because not only have they missed playing the actual game, they've been very restricted in their training. So the potential for a Victorian boy that gets drafted to turn up and be able to sort of train, strongly at an AFL level from day one is going to be limited as well, I would have thought. And there's probably more chance that they might suffer some sort of soft tissue injury. So when you're discussing a Victorian boy in this year's draft, they're all the things you've got to consider, as well as not just, they haven't played much. It's, a lot of their training has been kick to kick with their mates in a park for a long period of time as well, because of the restrictions that they've been under. So there's a lot of factors. There's always a risk in any draft with any pick. But I like to think that we all do a mountain of work in minimising that risk. But as you know, some draft picks don't work out and some do. And so there's always that little risk. But, we do everything we can to minimise it.
Yeah. The last one from me sort of on that then is in that grouping of players that you've sort of narrowed down for pick 12, is the suggestion among you and all of the people that make this pick that whoever you take in that grouping is going to be a project player or someone that you think is probably, hopefully, instant impact?
I'd like to think in this day and age, even though I said the restrictions around the country, I think, you'd like to think if you're picking a player in the first round that they're potentially going to have some impact on your senior team in their first year. How much, I don't know when you're sort of outside the top 10, but I think when you're picking inside the top 10, you're looking for someone that can come into your team reasonably quickly and play. I mean, we've seen over the last few years, Lockie Jones was probably potentially in line for round one before he got injured, but played once he was fit again. Connor, Zach and Xavier all sort of come in and made an immediate impact. Mitch Georgiades as well. So you're sort of hoping with your first round picks that they come in and sort of work their way into the senior team fairly quickly.
Thanks, Geoff.
No worries.
Just the last couple, guys, if there's any more.
I just wondered, Geoff, you said before that you're not exactly sure, I guess, how it's going to, who's going to fall to you out of that group of guys. But in general, do you expect any major surprises ahead of you in terms of the type of talent that's picked above you, or do you expect it to be a certain pool of guys that perhaps everyone thinks is going to be in that range?
Oh, look, I think from the amount of the information we've been able to gather, and also reading some stuff in the media, I think it seems to be the same names, that same group of players that are always talked about in front of us. And so I think that's going to be the case. It's just a matter of which one or two are still there when it's our turn to pick and which ones have been taken. So I think the names are all sort of the right names that have been mentioned. It's just what club picks them or doesn't pick them, and which couple of players are sort of still there when it's our first turn to have a crack.